Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. My name is Herschel36, and on the other line I have the one and only Crrow 777. Crrow, before we get going, I just want to ask you this simple question. What have the three dates got in common? 30th of April 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in a bunker in Berlin. Then on the 22nd of November 1963, John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States, was assassinated. On September 11th, 2001, two planes were flown into the Twin Towers by none other than Bin Laden.
You gotta beat the thumps inside your mind. Pumps your heart and keeps your thoughts in time. Oh yeah, oh no, here comes the radio show. Oh no.
History is a lie agreed upon, but that's kind of a blanket statement attributed to Napoleon, whether or not he actually existed. The truth is that world affairs have been run with basically stagecraft. Each of the things you just mentioned were made up out of whole cloth, in my view, with no exception. Even the whole Nazi paradigm, I don't accept it as it's been handed us, and a lot of people have a problem with that. But when you come up to the more modern things, where I was actually alive when they occurred, in my view, JFK was stagecraft, and I think most people living at this point who are not walking around in a daydream understand that 9/11 was complete nonsense. And for my part, I don't even accept that a man named Bin Laden ever existed in this world.
Well, that's right. That's kind of my point. The last show that yourself and Jason completed, which was published last Thursday, whatever date that was, the 23rd, 24th of March, no, the 22nd of March, was absolutely exceptional. You were talking about the education system, and if anyone is listening to this particular podcast and you're looking for some insights into the way this world what this world works, then check out Crrow777radio.com. It's top quality stuff. A lot of the stuff you're talking about is about how we are programmed from birth. That's my understanding of it, and I think where you've led me, or where I find myself, is looking at modern day media and thinking that modern day media has taken over from religion.
Well, I think in some ways you're right. These two things are still working forward on the same timeline. It does seem like organized religion is beginning to fall away. I just read something that told me the Church of England was less than 1% of attendance or something like that, or less than 3%. I forget what it was. But media is wholly owned and operated to do one thing, isn't it? And that's to instill a point of view into the modern human mind. And unfortunately, for most of the world, there is no requirement that media tells you the truth. There is no law. There is nothing that prevents them from making things up out of whole cloth. And to top it off, there's all these like tricky little things they employ where probably even half the people delivering the nonsense may be not even aware that they're delivering nonsense.
So when you asked me about my decision to the area where I'm going to publish this particular interview, we mentioned YouTube, because we both ascertain that YouTube will probably give me a strike due to the content of the opening section of this particular interview, i.e. I asked about 9/11, I asked about JFK, and I asked about Adolf Hitler. And through your experience, you think that the modern day book burning will restrict me from where I can post this content. Is that correct?
That is correct, but, there's a thing we know about book burnings. We can look back through history. There's no defense of this kind of mindset. There's no defense for the mental censorship of living human beings. And so if they do choose to strike you and remove this video, which they may well, they are showing the world, in fact, the truth of the matter. Because if we were just crazy people talking about crazy things, there would be no need to censor us. And the truth is that if you want to ensure you get censored, talk about crisis actors, talk about all the false shootings or right now the false bombings that are going on. If you talk about these things, you will be censored. And that tells anyone listening the truth of what is going on. There is no need to censor a thing that is just nonsense. And as I've said so many times, a person or an entity cannot make a false thing true. And the reverse of that is also true. And when we look at the censorship and where it's applied, it tells us what's what.
Yep, you're right. There's nothing to be fearful than fear itself, and the system, for want of a better term, seems to want to keep me, you, my children, your family, and the whole population, especially in the Western world, in fear. This is definitely, as far as I can see it, this is how they're controlling us predominantly, correct?
Right, but you can't just point the finger outside of yourself wholly on this. Yeah, there's bad entities and bad people doing bad things, but you need to look in the mirror. Fear porn only works if you're afraid. And if you're afraid, then basically you're acting like a child in a dark room. When you grow up and you assess what's going on, you will quickly understand there is no reason to be so easily scared because your TV says this or shows you that. This is not a basis for a true adult to become afraid and lose common sense. So at the same time that we can point at these people and media doing a bad thing, the wrong thing, we cannot ignore what our responsibility in all this is. And our responsibility is to use common sense to challenge the things we're being presented with and quit acting like scared children in a dark room. It's that simple.
So there's a growing up that needs to take place, and I need to do it myself as an individual. Now, listen, when you say that to me, I think, how the hell do I do that? Because I'm so associated with being told what to do and how to do it from school onwards into the world, getting a job, having a business, and so on and so forth. So it's actually petrifying. For an individual in society not to do as everyone else is doing. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, of course it does. And certainly the system that we live in is built to try to require us to do what our neighbor is doing or what the people in our community are doing. But you see, if you boil it down to brass tacks, it's just basically about changing your mind, isn't it? You can still fit in and do your part as a member of society, but you need to change your mind if you find yourself wayward. And, you know, this is why I've always said belief is the enemy of knowing. That's not a dig at somebody's religious belief. It's not that at all. It's the simple, basic, common sense idea that if I am presented with information, it needs to be challenged. If I can't challenge it or don't want to challenge it or don't have the time to challenge it, then don't accept it. Just set it aside. Do not accept it. And I don't care how authoritative the information source, it doesn't matter. If some information comes to you, you've got to apply human logic and reason to decide whether that thing is acceptable or not. And that's a big part of the problem that has crept into the modern world. Somebody turns on a television, sees some nonsense, and that's their reality. That's not the adult mindset. That is not using the responsibility that we all have as adults to, in fact, challenge what's going on here to determine if it is worth accepting and if it has any real value.
Okay, so let's take an example. That example is ISIS. Now, ISIS, ISIS, is rumoured to be a band of militants somewhere in the Middle East, I do believe, and they're chopping off heads, killing people, and have done for a number of years, and they're causing absolute havoc. And I know about ISIS through the newspapers and the television and general media. However, on your last show, yourself and Jason were talking about Paris, and Paris was called Paris, is that correct? And I just wanted to ask you about that, and if you'd go further into the meaning of that and what actually ISIS is.
Well, it's doing a few things. It's making people afraid, like children in a dark room, for one, on the top level on the face of it, but it's also leading the human mind astray, because the idea of ISIS way back in time was aspects of nature. That's what the idea of Isis, Horus, and Osiris are. They're not gods. They're not any of these things. They were aspects of nature. They were used to allow a human mind to wrap their head around aspects of nature so that they could then in turn do things in this world we live in. So not only is the idea of Isis scaring you or trying to scare you, it is making the word itself bad when in fact there is an older system in play that people could know about that has value. It's a natural science of this place we live. So there's a couple of things that this false modern idea is seeking to do to the adult human mind in the modern age.
Okay, so you're talking about alchemy.
Yeah, and I hate to use those terms, but we don't have any way to describe it. But you see, the word alchemy in a way is no different than the word Isis. It was also defamed to make it seem like witchcraft or hocus pocus or all these other things. So let's throw aside these terms that have been so defamated by modern media and just say natural science. There are aspects of nature in this world that once upon a time, the older sciences did everything they could do within the confines of nature. They never went beyond what nature allows to do what they could do. And modern science is so far from this. And these older sciences, it's like when the church made the word pagan a bad word. Well, the word pagan simply means a person who lives in nature or who dwelt in the country. In other words, a person who understood how to live with nature. And look how it was defamed. It's the same idea from a different angle, isn't it?
It is. You came to fame. Well, you came to my fame. I shouldn't use that word because it's a ridiculous word, right?
It is.
But you came to my. I came to know of you via the lunar wave, right? Which is quite an exceptional piece of photography. Let's put it that way. And you're also focusing a lot of your research at the moment, I think, around the equinox, and the vernal equinox has just passed. I think it was due to be on the 20th of March, but I think the actual date was the 17th of March, which takes us back to these natural occurrences in this place we call planet Earth, right? What is the equinox?
Well, that's a really good question. Historically, back through the oldest things we can read, it was a day of balance, where down to the second, the amount of daylight and the amount of nighttime balanced equally on these days. There's only 2 in a whole year, and that's the historical account. Now, there are scientific things that were typically wrapped up in this idea of the equal day and night that were all supposed to come together at the same day twice a year. The other part of that being the sun reaching 0 degrees in declination and rising due east. So what we've uncovered is that not only do they announce the equinox on the wrong day, but you cannot match equal day and night with 0 degrees declination of the sun or the idea of it rising due east in most cases. And you just stated that it was probably on the 17th, but the truth is it depends where you are. It's completely relative to the observer. In other words, like a person in Los Angeles would not see sunrise at the same time as a person in New York. We can logically work this out. My point is I've known the equinoxes were being reported wrong for a long time. It just took me quite a while to start to get down to the crux of it. When we finally began to look up sunrise and sunset times to truly determine when equal day and night were happening, what we found was that in the case of the one that just passed, where I am on the east coast of the United States in Rhode Island, is that they announced it for the 20th, but truly equal day and night happened on the 17th. But we found other things too. If we were up in Canada, there would be a day different. If we went to the lower southern United States, it would be a day different. But to really confuse things, by the time we got down to the equator, looking up this data, we found places right on the equator that seemingly have no equinox any day of the year. And then in between 2 places that this is true, there's another city or town where they do have an equinox, completely throwing rhyme or reason out the window. So for whatever reason, the equinoxes are currently broken. We're working to try to understand more. But to top it off, come to find out all these years later that back in 2012, when I accidentally filmed the first lunar wave, it was on a true equinox day. I think they announced it as the 22nd, and I accidentally shot the first lunar wave on the 26th. So there's all that, man.
Okay, so we know that in this place we call planet Earth, everything is obfuscated. I can't even say the word. You and Jason use it quite a lot. What's the word you use to hide things?
Yeah, just hidden. Yeah, it's obscured is maybe a good way to say it.
Well, it's obscured, right? So are they trying to hide the equinox? And if they are, why?
Well, the modern way we live has removed people from nature, and it's going to be an element of control someday. Even the way we reckon time pulls us all out of nature, like time zones do it. In the United States, in the central time zone, there's places where it's seemingly about 800 miles wide or something like that. So if you put a guy on the eastern side of that and a guy on the western side of that 800-mile wide central time zone, they would look at their watch. Guess what? Same time for both of them. This is nonsense. They will both witness sunrise and sunset at a different time. And this was implemented by the kind of robber barons who brought the railroad system to bear, and they wanted to implement the time zones to, fit what they were doing with train timing. Point here is the further we get pulled out of nature, the more controllable we become. And that's probably what all of this is about.
Control.
Yeah, it's that simple. It's always been the same game, back in a time, if there ever was a time, that we had kings and queens. What do you think they thought about in a day? So here's this small royal family surrounded by masses of people. What do you think their chief concern was? How do we maintain control, right? And even back in those days, theater and art were primary means to control the masses, to implant ideas, false or otherwise, into the masses' mind, to control them. The game has never changed. It's just that now we're in the modern era, and with all the information exchange, it's a pretty serious thing to witness when every person spends a major portion of the day with their face in front of a TV or an electronic device.
That's right. That's a great way to control people. During your last interview or discussion with Jason, you spoke about the United States Naval Observatory, correct?
Yes, we did.
And I just want to highlight that and identify the importance of the Naval Observatory. I'm assuming the Naval Observatory is on land, but it's interesting that it's associated with the Navy, which is associated with water.
Of course, everything in this world, for people who are in the know, understand that even our legal system has to do with admiralty law. And yes, most of the things in our world, even the language, can be brought back to a naval or maritime idea. The Naval Observatory, which is also one of the main world timekeepers, they claim to be running what's called a cesium clock there. We're offering some of the best times that we could find, most accurate, that we could test to look for sunrise and sunset times.
Okay, and what's the significance between the latest equinox and the Naval Observatory? Was there a mistake in the timings?
No, for what we have discovered, the simplest explanation would be that the data we're using is wrong. But we used a lot of places. We used Muslim prayer times, which could be corresponded to the sun. We used the Jewish luni-solar calendar. We used time date. We used the Naval Observatory. We used any number of things to confirm that the data we were using was accurate. But to top it off, we had quite a thread going on Crrow777radio.com. And we were all headed over the Naval Observatory because most people had agreed there it was the most accurate source we could find. And lo and behold, a day or two later, they shut that site down and put up a mission critical statement image, locking everyone out for a period of time. I think it was less than 24 hours that it came back online. But it's probably not coincidence that we had probably hundreds of people headed in there to get data right before they closed the site.
Because people will say, well, these things happen, it is coincidence. But I truly believe that nothing happens by chance in the system that we have been born into. Would you agree to that at all?
Well, I think it's demonstrable, isn't it? Cause and effect runs everything. You will never see a cause that wasn't preceded, or an effect that wasn't preceded by a cause, or vice versa. That's the nature of how we live here. If you see ripples on water, you know something made those ripples. It's that idea. You can demonstrate it, you can prove it. I don't accept coincidence. And not only that, the image they put up said, you know, your request is denied. This is mission critical information. I mean, we were looking up sunrise and sunset times, so you can see the absurdity on the face of it.
So we've been dominated by religion for hundreds and hundreds of years, and to some extent we are. However, things are changing. So when I took my children to midnight mass and the Irish priest in Dublin said, welcome sinners, my son turned around to me and said, Dad, what's a sinner? And that's an indication of the changing aspects of society. However, with my children, and they have their mobile phones, they're always on the computers, they're watching TV, and it's hard to get them out of that process. So technology is driving forward. I know you guys have spoken a lot about cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, ERC20 tokens, and so on. Is this technological revolution, is this the next stage of control, in your opinion?
Well, that's kind of a loaded question. There's a few ways we could go at it, but basically one of the things we have put forward is that the people who run this show are creating a technological artificial world because they can be kings of that. In other words, you can't really own the natural world lock, stock, and barrel and be the god of it. But if you create technological world, you can be the god of that. That's the idea behind it. And cryptocurrency is a good example. Cryptocurrency is just human bait. It has no real value. It doesn't even truly exist. And if a day ever comes where cryptocurrency has replaced our current nonsensical monetary system, where we pass IOUs around, it will be the ultimate loss of freedom that this world has ever seen. Never again will anything be bought or sold that isn't put permanently in a blockchain record. Not only that, everything that goes on will be educating artificial intelligence. It's funny if you think about simple things like imagine somebody trying to use cryptocurrency to go buy some pot. You see, if you begin to logically work at it, there's a permanent record of that purchase being made, right? They could call it something else, but I think you see where this goes. But cryptocurrency is a good example of how the artificial system will control every aspect of human existence. And, you can imagine not too far in the future if cryptocurrency became the main and only game where you could go to the ATM or however you were getting your money and it said, sorry, you can't have money today because your license is not up to date. That's where this heads. And it's the ultimate form of control, isn't it?
Well, it is and it isn't. So as an example, you're right about going and buying some grass, some weed. That already takes place in certain areas of the US. I'm pretty certain, according to my sources. But the thing about cryptocurrency, it's based on open source code, and you know better than me that the coders are generating a copy of script, i.e. you've got Bitcoin, but a copy of that script is called Litecoin. So there's all different monetary systems that are building up from the initial script that I think was developed in the 80s, I do believe. I'm not that sure, but the blockchain technology is providing a ledger of all transactions. Of course, enthusiasts are saying this is the end of government, but I'm very suspicious of it.
Please.
Exactly.
Please. It's just a way for the hidden hand to be even more hidden. Nobody really knows who created cryptocurrency and nobody really knows who controls it. And people can argue any way they want all day long, but those are the facts, Jack. And in terms of blockchain technology, think about this. So AI will be running a lot of this. And in some ways, I view cryptocurrency as the cheese and the mousetrap for the AI. In other words, the cryptocurrency exists to educate the AI. But when AI solves a problem these days, it gets a block in the blockchain. Well, that's a problem that never needs to be solved again. So you can see where this heads. It's so far from a good idea that the people who want to argue in favor of it are being enamored by the value of gold or the perceived value of riches, these kinds of things. If you logically look at what we're talking about here, it is the ultimate form of control for anyone who can take control of it or who already has control of it. And it would be tough to get out from under a banking system like that. I mean, could you ever? I don't know.
Well, that's a very fair point. I mean, the current banking system is corrupt in its system anyway, with fractional reserve banking and the fact that we, as you said before, we're just passing around IOUs. There's no two ways about that. And I know for a fact that the next level of generation within a crypto farm, which is like a hybrid data center, is artificial intelligence. I know that for a fact because I've seen it and I've spoken to the coders who are doing it. So I do have a slight insight into this particular area. And I also know for a fact that as this grows, this technology, the people who are pushing it forward are prospectors. And they're looking at engaging in the technology so they can make more money out of it mid to long term. And it's taking the whole environment of society away from the natural environment that we actually live in.
I'll tell you a little story that gives the person who's not sleepwalking a little bit of insight with regard to who's controlling cryptocurrency and why it's being pushed in the way it is. There was a major crash of the value of cryptocurrency not too long ago. A few weeks before that happened, on the most popular or one of the most popular television shows in the United States called The Big Bang Theory, there was an episode where the stars of that, or the characters in that show, remembered that they had mined some Bitcoin in 2010 when it first came available, and it was on a thumb drive somewhere. And if they could just find that thumb drive, each Bitcoin was worth thousands of dollars or something at that point. I've forgotten. They would all be rich. And so they all went in search of this Bitcoin. At the end of the episode, a guy in a comic book shop finds the thumb drive that has the Bitcoin on it. And he says out loud, all right, if I erase all the data off this thumb drive, I can sell the thumb drive for $10 and make $10. Okay. A couple weeks later, the Bitcoin currency crashed. I think it went to half value or something. You can see already, if you're not a sleepy person and you have slightly decent vision, the correspondence of what I just said, how the people who want Bitcoin to be the thing are using television to further the idea. And for the average mind, they'll miss the point here. They'll think it's all just coincidence, but I'm here to tell you, rub the sleep out of your eyes. There is no coincidence in this system. And that's just one example of how I can point to you that BitCurrency is already under someone's control and that you will never know who that someone is.
Well, there's a lot of truth in that. Let me back that statement up. So running into week 1 of January 2019, Bitcoin was just under $20,000 for 1 unit of Bitcoin, which in fact is a script, okay? It's 16 letters and numbers, which is the address. And then it crashed to just under $6,000, which is roughly a correction of 70%. Currently, 1 Bitcoin's, let's say, for give or take a few quid here or there, it's trading at around $10,000. And what I noticed at the run, because this is called a bull run, as you enter the end of November through December, and I noticed that there was so much media pushing this content, and it was just buy. People couldn't buy enough, and then all of a sudden, someone came in and the whole market collapsed. And as Bitcoin collapsed, so did every other altcoin associated with the marketplace. But you always talk about that television show. I've never watched it, but you and Jason have talked about the scientist Stephen Hawking being on that television show, and I'm assuming that its importance is because of its reach around the globe. Correct?
Right. Any show that is super popular hits more minds. Any show that hits enough minds is clearly going to be used to program. And, to get back to the Bitcoin thing, what do people need to understand about an artificial system that's being artificially manipulated? Like, let's take gold as an example. So 1 month gold is worth this amount of money, and the next month or 3 months later, it's worth that amount of money. This is artificial manipulation. Did suddenly we wake up and there was less gold in this world? Did suddenly we wake up and there was more gold in this world? It is all artificially manipulated, all of it. And it doesn't matter whether you're using our current IOU system or any other system. You need to understand that these fluctuations and the ideas that are put around interest and the ideas that are put around inflation or any of these things is artificial manipulation. After all, if I put on a pair of tennis shoes, they're worth what they're worth. How come in a week my tennis shoes, the value of my tennis shoes hasn't dived to nothing? They've been used a little more, so I guess you could argue they're worth a little less than the day I first put them on, but I think you can understand what I'm getting at here. It's all artificial manipulation. And in the current banking system, we think we have some idea, at least, who's controlling it. We're showed people in government who are setting interest rates or other things at the Federal Reserve. But when you get to Bitcoin, all that's out the window, baby. Never again will you ever see the hidden hand that's doing the manipulation. And when you see one of the most popular shows in the West pushing the Bitcoin idea, showing people how rich they could be with a single Bitcoin, and then a couple weeks after that airs, the value of Bitcoin crashing, you need to wake up. That's artificial manipulation, and it's being preceded by programming.
Yeah, you're right. However, someone would argue, modern television will comment on social activities, and that's part of what TV script writing is all about, right? Making it poignant to day-to-day living. But the fact is, as you have discussed yourself, is the TV is set up to set us into a kind of a meditative a state of mind. So we're working from the lower limbic part of the brain, and we're more programmable. This is correct, isn't it?
What TV does is it pushes an agenda. It pushes a programming. That's what it is there for. In the same way, you can look back some number of years to when the gay and lesbian idea was more hidden or less talked about. You can see how slowly television has programmed it into the mainstream, where it's gone so far now that transgenderism, gay and lesbian wasn't enough. They had to keep pushing till now they're all into the transgender thing. If you think this is just reflecting on what's happening in the world, you're wrong. It's the other way around. It's driving what's happening in the world. It's absolutely programming and putting forth these ideas into our reality. That's what television, movies, and all entertainment has always done, even all the way back, if there was such a time where the Greek amphitheaters were playing the plays of the day. There has never been a time when the people in control of this world didn't understand the value of what theater and entertainment in general can do and have been doing to society since as far back as we can look.
Boom. You're absolutely right. Of course, all roads lead back to Rome, the Roman Catholic Church. We've been indoctrinated. I've been indoctrinated for as long as I can remember, and it starts off in the family unit. Then I get indoctrinated in school. I don't get you and Jason spoke a lot about languages. I'm 45 years of age and I'm trying to learn a brand new language. I live in Spain and I'm trying to learn Spanish, and it's very difficult because my brain takes time to compute. And so I think you mentioned that with languages comes with the ability of accessing information around the world at a much, much higher level. That's correct, isn't it?
Well, it's not just that. It gives you new ways to think about things. And in terms of what you're doing right now, I would point out, even basic ideas in English like gender are lost mostly in English. But when you get over into Spanish, you will understand that every time you say a noun, it's pretty much associated with being, masculine or feminine. And so these ideas go back to an old natural science. So yes, I can say yes, flat out. Big benefit for people who speak more than one language. And I would further point out We just did this in the education episode. If your children were exposed to learning Spanish, it's very likely they would pick it up much more quickly than us older folk will. The young mind will assimilate and sponge up information much more readily than someone who's, a little bit longer in the tooth.
Which is a key point, because my children do speak multiple languages, right? Which is great. However, the same mind that absorbs content and books and reading and writing also absorbs the same level of content via iPhones, iPads, mobile phones, Androids, computers, films, videos, and those subliminal images that are in movies and pop videos. This is correct, isn't it? So it's very dangerous.
Well, then you're pointing out the importance for understanding that media is used to program. So all these forms of media that are aimed at young minds, as an adult, take common sense with you in your back pocket and closely examine the games and other things that children, even the movies, that are aimed at children. And you'll instantly be able to understand the programming that's been put there. And even if it's innocuous, even if it's just how society works or what's going on with the family unit, if you carefully deconstruct it with common sense, you'll see the ideas that are being put front and center.
Yep. And I can understand it, but can I accept it on a day-to-day basis? I still struggle, even having spoken to you over the last 3 or 4 years, however long we've been doing these kind of interviews, and listening to you and Jason for well, I've listened to every episode you've ever put out on your radio station, and still there is some form of denial in me that this is taking place. And I think to myself, well, it sounds great, it's very intellectual, but can it really be true? Is there really an elite group of people in this construct called planet Earth that are ultimately a different hybrid of human being?
See, for me, maybe it's more helpful just to work on changing your own mind than it is to identify the root of the problem. First of all, you probably never know their names, if you look at it logically. So just to identify using common sense what's helpful and what's not helps you change your mind. And when you change your mind, you become an example for your children or for any number of other people around you. If there's value in the way you have changed your mind, typically people will recognize that. It's like any leadership position in this world. If what's being put out on offer has value, people will assimilate or follow it.
You're living on the East Coast now, aren't you, Crrow?
Yeah, I live in Rhode Island, not too far from New York.
Yeah. So it must be freezing at the moment.
Well, that's a whole equinox thing that we've been getting into. They announced the false day for the equinox, which was actually 3 days earlier if you measure an equinox by equal day and night. And we've had snow after. And I've been meaning to go back and try to look up old accounts of seasons to find out in climes that aren't super far north, is it normal to get freezing cold weather after it's called spring? So that was one of the things I was going to look into. Certainly, if you get far enough north, I think it's obvious what the answer would be. But it's an interesting thing to look at how much older cultures define the seasons, because the truth is, these were the most important days on the calendar. It's how we got things like Easter and Passover and all these other things. These are marking the equinoctial points and the solstitial points.
So on that point, obviously, well, not obviously, but the clocks went forward this morning in Europe. Did the clocks go forward in the US on the 11th of March?
I forget the day. I try to separate myself from that. As a matter of fact, sometimes I don't. I change my clock back for some period of time, which causes trouble, of course, at certain times. But all the states but 2 do what's called daylight savings time. The 2 states that do not are Arizona and Hawaii, I am told. But there's an old saying that's attributed to an Indian chief. Who knows if it's true, if that's actually where it came from. But it goes like this. The Indian chief said only a white man would cut a foot off the bottom of a blanket, sew it to the top of the blanket, and think he'd change something. And it's kind of a perfect allegory for the nonsensical nature of daylight savings, which is just designed to pull us out of the natural cycle of time. And of course, it's done right near the equinoxes, which kind of proves the point.
Yeah, it is a bit. It jolts everything, doesn't it? And everyone's got to reset themselves and then get back into another routine. It's just there's all these slight changes throughout the year that keep me as an individual disassociated from the natural way of living life, and it associates me with this digital technological age. Any truth in that?
Yeah, I will never be able to overstate how critically important it is for a human being to recognize the natural cycles of time. Anyone who wants to go back and read the oldest accounts they can get their hands on will find out what a big deal the equinoxes and solstices were. This is the only true division of time we have here, and it marks the seasons, of course. When you get up into the modern age, I mean, is there a person listening that when daylight savings happens, you don't feel discombobulated? And about the time you get used to it, of course, it happens again. And the reasons given for implementing it are nonsensical. In the United States, one of the reasons given for implementing it was that the farmers needed more daylight. That's nonsense on the face of it. There's as much daylight as there is, right? If a farmer wanted more time in the light of day, he would wake up accordingly, right? But yet they changed the whole clock over. And again, to actually live a life where sunrise is marked by when the sun comes up, or noon. Noon is a good example. If you go look up what time the sun rises in your area on any given day and what time it goes down, the exact center point of those hours of daylight will be what's called solar noon. Now look at the time of solar noon to the time you're told noon is. It's a good example. So we have an artificial idea of even what noon is. Noon means when the sun is at the highest point for that day. It's what it means.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm on the south coast of Spain. Obviously, noon is 12 o'clock, right? But the Spanish have their siesta at the hottest part of the day when the sun is at the highest part of the sky. And that's roughly between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, which kind of agrees with what you're saying, correct?
Well, I would point out that in older cultures, they would truly have been taking their break when the sun was truly at its high point. And again, if you look at your wristwatch or your cell phone and it says, guess what, it's 12 noon, it's actually not. I mean, it could be by chance a couple times or one time a year or something like that. But again, if you look up true solar noon, you will find out that what artificial time is telling you is not noon at all. Noon is when the sun is at its highest point. That will be the hottest point of the day for people in places where there is heat. And that's all there is to it, which means the idea of taking a siesta historically needed to correspond with when the sun was actually at its highest point, giving you the hottest point of the day. And yet we're all convinced that when the clock says noon now, it is that time, when in fact it is not that time.
That's right. So the true knowledge has been hidden from people like me. Okay, so when I go and listen to your show, what I'm doing is I'm accessing real knowledge. That's what I think I'm doing, and sometimes my brain disassociates from what you're saying. So I've got to go over the content maybe twice or maybe 3 times to actually understand what's taking place here. However, if I go onto Google as an example and I type in ISIS, which what you and Jason have discussed, I come up with a different level of information now. And I think what you guys are discussing together is that when you are researching, you're finding it harder and harder to get quality information. This is correct, out of Yahoo and Google, etc., correct?
Right. As we see the censorship, and if we're adults, we understand why censorship is happening, because people are saying things that the powers that be do not want heard by very many people. We can logically work out that the accessing of information is in the same boat. And what we have found over the course of 100 shows, it is now damn difficult to get to information that matters. But to just make one comment, to be fair about what you said about our show, we do the best we can. But there is not a single thing that we ever say on that show that does not need to be challenged. We do the best we can. So it's kind of your responsibility as an adult human being to challenge what we're saying, to see if there's value in it for you. Nobody should just come and listen to our show, and in the same way they shouldn't just watch the news and accept what's being said. You should challenge it, just to be fair there.
Yep, absolutely. That's why I go over and over it, because there's things that jolt me, and I think, can that be true? Or, I don't agree with everything that you guys are saying. However, I know that you use specific books. I think one of the books was Silent Weapons for Silent Wars, which is something that Jason I was talking about, and then you were talking about a book for farmers. Did you have a top 6 list of must-read books?
Well, my rule of thumb, let's go at it like this. My rule of thumb is any person who reads a lot will come to understand that most things that have been published recently fall under what I call the modern edit. You can just kind of smell the difference. And when you go back to the oldest things you can get your hand on, there's a sense of reality and intention in a lot of the much older texts that is absent. And so that's what I will say. I love to get my hands on things that were published in the early 1800s, as an example. It's a whole different point of view. But again, all of it falls in the same category. You need to test it. But one of the striking things about things written a long time ago is they often do not jive with the very same topics written about in the modern era. And there's a reason for that. You will find that each kind of age or era that we go through, what the powers that be want held as common, acceptable information changes. It changes over time, and that tells you something about the veracity of the information. You see, if I looked at a rose in 1800, the rose would be red, wouldn't it? If I looked at that rose in the 20th century, the rose would be red. So one rule of thumb I use is that there is no lie in nature. If you use the natural world to learn things, there is no lie in it. And we all certainly know that information that comes from human beings is often riddled with nonsense and lies.
This is the truth. As we've discussed in previous interviews, and you probably don't remember, but I'm heavily into the area of recovery from drugs and alcohol, and have been for many years. It's the basis of that recovery is to try and be as honest as possible, and it's very difficult. It's very difficult indeed, and I find it a challenge in today's society to balance off the need to go out there, earn money, and be part of a society that believes in falsehood, and also come to terms with what's true in the world, and come to find some peace in that, because it can be very disturbing at times.
It can, but it's, a lot of coming to grips with a lot of the content we cover. It's a bit like the 5 stages of grief. At first it's unbelievable, and there's a point where you become upset by it. Then you start to come to grips with it. There is a point where you hit equilibrium, and then you need to make some decisions as a human being. For me, my main concern is, how can I benefit other living beings in this world? How can I live my life where I do no harm to any living being? Those are the things that are important to me. And when you get away from, this entity is doing bad things to us, or the media is really harming us, and you get back to these mindsets, it's a kind of new peace that you find in your life to move forward. And I think that's what's critical, because it is so easy to get tied up in whatever the false news of the day is, and to be fearful because of it, or to be filled with sorrow or dread or regret. When you live your life in these ways, you're living in a control mechanism. When you get back away from that to making decisions based on what you think you should be doing, what's the best you can do in your life, there's a lot of freedom in it.
Crrow, I know you don't like me asking questions based on religion or spirituality, but do you believe in a power greater than you?
I don't talk about religion because I find most of times the people who come to listen will already have a religious point of view, and it seems to devolve into fighting pretty quickly, and I think that's a shame. Almost all people that I have ever met in my life need a spiritual component. It's almost like men and women have this innate inborn quality that they need to spiritually rise in their lifetime. To answer your question, yes, I think it is critically important for a human being to spiritually rise. But beyond that, I won't say much more because I'm not interested in starting fights between religious ideas. And suffice it to say, I think it's important that everyone spiritually tries to heighten to the degree they can in this lifetime.
Great answer. And we're coming to the end of this little interview. It's really good to be in contact with you. I'll say again, if you're listening to this podcast and you are not subscribed to Crrow777radio.com, you are missing out. You certainly are. And Crrow, you and Jason, or I should say Jason, I'm sure it's his initiative. Jason's putting together a video around your experiences of filming the lunar wave and those people who've been involved in that journey. Now, for me, I know for you that probably isn't your, it's something that's happening, but for me that's really interesting. So can you tell me a little bit more about that film and when it's likely to go live? Because I'm sure Jason's pretty good, man.
Jason's very good at the things he puts his mind to, and he is an audio engineer, but he did pick up professional cameras. He's already, for people who follow me, they'll have heard the name Randy from Houston, who filmed the lunar wave twice. He's already been out to interview him. Initially, Jason came to me and he said he wanted to do a kind of biography on me, and people who follow me, I'm not interested in being the focal point. I've never been interested in that. It's the information that I think is important to get out. I don't want to be a personality, but as Jason and I talked, I came to understand that it is important to at least get our point of view, because I was there. So the point of view that I have of how all this happened, to get it down and present it out as a real film, which is what Jason's going to do. So we're going to pick up around the year 2012 when I first accidentally filmed the lunar wave, and then, all the things that happened moving forward from there. So yeah, we're going to do it. And it's pretty much Jason's thing. You know me, I'm kind of a hermit. I don't really want the public limelight, but I do think it is critical to get these things on the record, and so I agreed to do it.
Well, I'm involved with the Marbella Film Festival, and if you guys want to have a showing here in mainland Europe, then I'm pretty certain I could organise that for you.
Well, that's a heck of an offer, because I know certainly that Jason is aiming to put it in some film festivals. I have mixed feelings, so what I've done is I've just handed it over to Jason, and I'm going to let him, drive it in whatever way it goes. I'll show up, I'll put down what I think is correct about what happened, and that will be my part of it. But certainly I think Jason might take you up on that.
Well, listen, from the perspective of someone who's looking to learn, I think it's a fantastic opportunity. It really is. I will watch that film. There's no two ways about it. And if we take the example of two planes flying into the Twin Towers and being that whole thing being driven from some geezer in a cave in Afghanistan, we know that there's some important aspects that you and others like Randy from Houston are uncovering and delivering to people like me who want to wake up a little bit, and the powers that be will turn that information and twist it. So the fact that Jason wants to do this, I think, is absolutely brilliant.
For me, the main takeaway is the big turning point many years ago in my life was observing the natural world, or what we call the natural world. Even if it's not natural, if it ends up not being natural in the way we think it is, it doesn't matter, because from our point of view, it's a perfect system. And when I quit being so concerned with the artificial systems and started to pay more attention to the natural systems, I began to learn things that are free from falsehood, that are free from lies, that are free from the scheming minds of men and women. And I think that's the main takeaway. In the same way that I accidentally filmed the first lunar wave in 2012, what happened on the tail of that is an interesting tale. But if you boil it back to nuts and bolts, it was a human being becoming more and more aware of paying attention to what we can learn from the natural world around us and how the age of technology is separating us from that world.
Brilliant. Crrow, to finish this interview, can you let people know how they can reach you, YouTube and other platforms?
So on YouTube, I'm Crrow777. There's 2 R's in the word Crow, so it's CRROW 777. And then my private website that we maintain so we can run a platform free of censorship. So basically we run content an hour to everyone on YouTube, and then there's a second hour for membership where we can talk in any way we choose to talk because there are no censors. You know, I own the site. That is Crrow777radio.com. Again, 2 R's in the word Crow. And those are primarily the 2 places. I do have a Twitter account, but I don't use it to communicate. I just announce when I'm putting out content there. So there's all that, man.
That's brilliant. And as a member of your website, your podcasts generally get to me once a week. They're absolutely spot on. There's been a couple of occasions when you haven't been well and those podcasts haven't arrived, but out of 100 podcasts, I've had a minimum of 98 of them, I think, or 97 on time, and they arrive in my inbox for about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday, and I very much look forward to that content. It's quality stuff, really is. It's well worth the monthly subscription fee.
Right. The 2 times that you're mentioning where the podcast was a day or 2 late were days where sickness, the flu, actually prevented the delivery of the content. If content is ever late for Crrow777radio.com, there's a reason for it. If I can get up and we can do the job, it will be delivered. If someone's got the flu or something else has happened, it won't be forgotten. It may be a day or 2 late, but in 100 shows, that's only happened twice.
Crrow, thanks very much for your time. Keep up the good work. I look forward to the film, and I look forward to the next podcast coming out next week. Do you know what the content is going to be about next week?
Yeah, we're actually going to be going over the history of the truth movement online. Jason, that's a topic Jason's been wanting to do, so I agreed to it a while ago, and that's what's on offer next time around.
Beat the thumbs inside your